Uneducated Economist here. So in this video, we are going to talk about the economic force of Cantillon effect, which is my favorite economist from hundreds of years ago who wrote the Cantillon essay on economic theory. Now, for a lot of people out there, when they think about economics and they think about what it is that's taking place out there, a lot of times they end up focusing in on politics or banking issues, which there's a lot to be said in both of those. But really, when it comes down to understanding the underlying economic forces of the Cantillon effect, how new money comes into the system that separates the rich from the poor, this is really the best understanding of what it is that you need to do in order to protect yourself. Because many times when we think about blaming politicians or blaming bankers or blaming the New World Order or blaming some other entity out there about the economic situation we now face, we also put to that same blame an expectation that there is hope, that something can be solved out there. We are past the point of no return. There is no way that they can fix it. We must understand it for ourselves so that we can then position ourselves in the most appropriate fashion. Now, when we look at it in a fashion that says, I understand the underlying economic force that is creating it, your subconscious belief system will then just give you the right path to go down. Like when you are not thinking of putting your money towards assets, you will think about putting your money towards having a good time. Because you are not focused in on monetary policy, you might be focused in on the fear of missing out on a party that you may not be experiencing. So you end up putting your energy, time, and focus towards something that has absolutely no return, in fact, depletes you, or you can focus towards something that is going to have a return that is going to be assets of stocks, bonds, businesses, rental properties, education, something that is going to put you in a position of better. Now, when you think about it on a daily basis, it's very difficult to not then be like so hyper focused that you end up spinning out of control when you're trying to figure out what it is you got to do, and your mind is just like, oh god, it's just like all this chaos from the political scene and all this uncertainty coming from the economy and all this stuff, and you start, oh god, what do I do? When you start stepping back and you look at it in a calmer fashion that says, nah, I think I understand this a little bit differently than what the news is trying to portray. Uh, Pretty soon you're looking at it and you're feeling good about the decisions that you've made, and you realize you were just kind of naturally making these decisions. The subconscious was picking it up that, hey, you understand these underlying economic forces that are playing out. And as you start to understand this, you are then just now making the right decisions and position yourself accordingly. All right, so we're going to start breaking down this speech, or not this speech, I'm sorry, this essay. And I've done this several times in the past, and this is really good. If your friends and family have not yet heard about the Cantillon essay on economic theory, this is the most important chapters. 6, 7, and 8. The increase and decrease of money to the state. The more you read these three chapters, the more you start to recognize what it is that's happening out there when tariffs and subsidies and manufacturers are all acting in the way that they are. So as we break this down, you have to also remember this is from hundreds of years ago. So Cantillon was talking about horses and wagons. We have cell phones and airplanes. Whole different time of area, but really when you start to think about it, a lot of it you're going to recognize as underlying economic forces. All right, let me make sure that the Wi-Fi is off. It is. Okay, let's get going here, guys. All right, be sure and hit the like button when you come into the live stream. Always hit the like button. By hitting that like button, you'll get the YouTube algorithm to pick up this video, spread it around for more people to join in. This is probably the best information that you can retain. Really, if there was nothing else that you ever wanted to learn about the economy and just pick up just one thing, this is probably it. If you can nail this part down, if you could get this bit of understanding and internalize this, the rest of it, although is very important, this will be on top of all of it as far as the importance goes, is to understand the increase and decrease of money to the state. And again, this is from Cantillon's essay, part 2, chapter 6. Here, Cantillon uses his price specie flow mechanism to analyze some of the effects of inflation. Increasing the supply of money by minting hurts some people and benefits others because certain prices and incomes rise faster than others. However, if new money is accumulated and saved by those who successfully export goods, either because of superior quality or more efficient transportation, it will lead to a higher standard of living. So right off the bat, the abstract is something that I have tried to share on this channel so many times, that if you increase the money supply, you will increase the standard of living. No doubt about it. And this is how we did it here in the United States, manufacturing powerhouse. So again, he describes it successful exports of goods, either by superior quality, again, United States, or more efficient transportation, the United States, it will lead to a higher standard of living, the United States. So we can recognize that these are the exact same things that led to the United States rising as a manufacturing powerhouse, which was the standard of living that we saw from that, right? Okay, moving on. If gold or silver mines were found in the state and considerable quantities of minerals were extracted from them, the owners of these mines, the entrepreneurs, and all those who work there will increase their expenditures in proportion to the wealth and profit they make. They will also lend the money they have over and above what they need for their expenses and earn interest. Now, bang, right there, right off the bat. How many times have you heard me say it? You got to lower your standard of living and lower your expenses and increase your income. Because once you have increased your income, you can deploy that income towards something that is going to have a return. That's exactly what he is saying people do who have new money coming in, the people who are closest to the money, right? They will lend that money they have over and above what they need for their expenses and earn interest. How many people do that? Like, very few of the working class individual does that unless they are actively participating in a 401k, maybe buying a house, they're making their payments on their house, getting into the real estate, or literally having like a Robinhood or Cash App or some sort of account like that where they are putting money towards it. But how many people are actually doing that? Very few. Right? So that's what people who are closest to the money are doing. Right? All this money, whether lent or spent, will enter into circulation and will not fail to raise the price of commodities and goods in all the channels of circulation it enters. That's important to remember for inflation, because it will not fail to increase the prices of all the channels of where it enters in at circulation, right? Where it enters the circulation. Increased money will bring about increased expenditures and thus will cause an increase of market prices in the good years and to a lesser degree in the bad years. So to remember that it's the increase of money will bring about an increase in expenditures, increase in consumption. That increase in consumption raises the market prices. That's important to remember, because that's the reason why we saw inflation, the COVID inflation, but we didn't necessarily see the great financial crisis inflation. It's because all the abundance of money didn't necessarily enter all channels at once, right? All right. Everybody agrees that the abundance of money or an increase in its use in exchange raises the price of everything. This truth is substantiated in experience by the quantity of money brought to Europe from America for the last 2 centuries. Mr. Locke lays it down as a fundamental maxim that the quantity of goods in proportion to the quantity of money is a regulatory of market prices. I have tried to elucidate this his idea in preceding chapters. He has clearly seen that the abundance of money makes everything more expensive. but he has not considered how this happens. The great difficulty of this question consists in knowing in what way and in what proportion the increase of money raises the prices of things. So, see, right there, he is questioning it. Way back in the day, they said, if you increase the money, you'll increase the prices, period. End of story. And Cantillon saying, I'm not going to disagree with that, but do you know how and why? Okay? And people just say it's real easy. More money, more stuff. But that's not exactly what happens when it doesn't enter into particular channels. It goes into some channels, yeah, it increases the prices of some things, but not others. This is the point, right? It increases consumption. Consumption creates supply-demand imbalances. But if you don't see that happening in all channels at once, you're not going to see an even inflationary expectation when you have money increases because of the channels that they have moved into in some ways and not in others. Does that make sense? Right? Just because the money goes up doesn't mean that all the prices go up. All right. The great difficulty, this question consists in knowing in what way and in what proportion the increase of money raises the prices of things. All right. I have already noted that I have already noted that the acceleration or the greater pace in the circulation of money in exchange is equivalent to a certain degree an increase of actual money. He's talking about money velocity right here, right? The acceleration of money. I have also noted that an increase or decrease of prices in a distant market, domestic or foreign, influences local market prices. Now, this is also something to think about, right? If you have a particular commodity that you are growing here, and all of a sudden there's commodity of the same that is growing outside of your location that is cheaper, guess what? Your commodity is going to have to match that price, or else the foreign competition is going to start coming in, right? So even the price of a foreign land, like you might be like, oh no, we're doing good, but then the foreign land all of a sudden has a cheaper price for it. Well, then now that dictates your price too. Okay, domestic or foreign influences local markets. Okay. On the other hand, money flows through so many retail channels that it seems impossible not to lose sight of it. Seeing that having been amassed to make large sums, it is distributed in small amounts in exchange, then gradually accumulated again to make large payments. For these operations, it is necessary to consistently exchange between gold, silver, copper, money according to the requirements of exchange. It is also usually the case that the increase or decrease of hard money in the state is not perceived because it comes into the state from foreign countries by such imperceptible means and proportions that it is impossible to know exactly the quantity which it enters or leaves the state. Now, for our case here in the United States, it starts to become a little different because we work with the central banking system. So in Cantillon's day, he's kind of talking about silver being the like silver and gold and copper being the hard monies, and not knowing exactly how much is coming and going because you can't tell exactly where it is that it's coming and going from. Well, here in the United States, it might be just a little different. We have, banking rules, and then you can see it kind of, exchanging and flowing through the banking system. But when it comes to cash, you can't necessarily see where that goes and whether or not it's leaving or staying in the United States outside of border controls or, through all the smuggling or whatever. So it is a little different, but yet it still takes place in some ways, right? However, all these operations happen before our eyes and everybody takes a direct part in them. I therefore venture to offer a few observations on the subject, even though I may not be able to give an exact or precise account. In general, an increase of hard money in the state will cause or corresponding increase in consumption, and this will gradually produce increased prices. This is where it comes from, right? An increase in hard money in the state will cause a corresponding increase in consumption, and this will gradually produce increased prices. You have to have the increase in consumption. Very important. The increase of hard money comes from the gold and silver mines within the state. So again, if we kind of reflect it to being a central banking system, the owner of these mines, the entrepreneurs and the smelters, refiners, and all the workers will increase their expenses in proportion to their profits. Again, the people who are closest to the money and how it is that they are dealing with that money. Their households, gee whiz, excuse me, guys. Their households will consume more meat, wine, or beer than before. They will become accustomed to wearing better clothes, having finer linens, and having more ornate houses and other desirable goods. Consequently, they will give employment to several artisans who did not have that much work before and who, for the same reasons, will increase their expenditures. Okay, this little portion right here, I think this is very critical for understanding like our central banking system right now. They will give employment to several artisans who did not have much work before. The new money comes in, what happens? People who did not have work before get work. Okay. Consequently, they will give employment to several artisans who did not have that much work before and who, for the same reasons, will increase their expenditures. Boom. They're increasing their consumption. You see what's happened here? So not only has the new money come in and like the people who got the new money are like, woohoo, we could spend this new money, but then the money that they're spending, these people who get first access to it beyond them, like the next people and fairly close to the new money, all of a sudden they're new to the new money and they're increasing their expenditures, all this increasing consumption, right? So let me read it again. They will give employment to several artisans who did not have that much work before and who, for the same reasons, will increase their expenditures. All this increased expenditures on meat, wine, wool, etc., necessarily reduces the share of the other inhabitants in the state who do not participate at first in the wealth of the mines in question. So you see it right there. This is the people who suffer the most. I mean, we can go back and we can talk about how it is that Jerome Powell back in 2020 said that when the inflationary scenario hits, the people who suffer the most are the people right here that Cantillon was describing hundreds of years ago who are going to suffer the most. Nothing changes about this. People who want to blame politicians, this is wrong. This was something that happened hundreds of years ago, no matter how you think about it, right? How is it the new money comes in? Doesn't matter if it's from a mine or if it's from the new money coming from the money printer, same thing is going to end up taking place, just like it's happening today. Okay? So let me read it again. Will increase their expenditures. All this increased expenditures on meat, wine, wool, etc., necessarily reduces the share of the other inhabitants, in the state who do not participate at first in the wealth of the mines in question. The bargaining process of the market will, with the demand for meat, wine, wool, etc., being stronger than usual, right? Because of all this new money, all this demand increases stronger than usual, will not fail to increase their prices. This is how it happens. The increase in demand increase the prices. It's not just the new money, but how that new money comes in. If you have last access to it, you're going to suffer the consequences from it. And this is not something that is politically motivated or driven. It might be exploited. Don't get me wrong about that. That might be the case. But this is something that is recognized hundreds of years ago through the use of a gold mine. Gold standard ain't that great either, right? I mean, if this is essentially what would happen under a gold standard, it's the same thing that would happen under a central banking currency system anyway. All right, here we go. All right, these high prices will encourage farmers to employ more land to produce the following year. And these same farmers will profit from the increased prices and will increase their expenditures on their families like others. Okay? Will increase their expenditures on their families like others. They increase their prices, increase their income, increase their standard of living. I'm sorry, does anybody recognize it? Right? Raise your hand if you recognize it. Hit the thumbs button if you recognize this being something that you recognize today, right? Let me read it again. The prices will encourage farmers to employ more land to produce the following year, and these same farmers will profit from the increased prices. Right? People want to say it's manipulation and greed and, gouging or whatever. Here we go. Underlying economic force that Cantillon recognized hundreds of years ago. Remember, go hit that like button if you're recognizing it today. All right. The same farmers will profit from the increased prices and will increase their expenditures on their families like the others. Those who will suffer from these high prices and increased consumption will be, first of all, and this is going to blow a lot of people's minds when they hear this because they don't want to believe it, but it is the fact. First of all, the people who suffer first, right? Let me read it again. Those who suffer from these high prices and increased consumption will be, first of all, the property owners. That's right. The property owners will be the ones who suffer first during their terms of leases because they have signed a contract saying, I will let you live on this land, borrow this land, rent this land, however you want to describe it, for a certain amount that is fixed. And while the inflation is kicking in, they're stuck at those leases. All right? That's what he's describing hundreds of years ago. The property owners suffer first during their terms of leases. Then they're domestic servants. Here comes the problem. Now everybody wants to bitch and complain about it, saying this is the politician's fault for doing this. They were suffering. I mean, you got to think, it was the property owners who were suffering first. They had to wait for all these leases to expire, and during that term, all the prices are going up. They don't have as much money coming in, and now who's going to suffer from it? The domestic servants, the people who are next in line, right? The people who are next in line start to suffer, and all the workmen and fixed wage earners who support their families on a salary. They all must diminish their expenditures in proportion to the new consumption. All these people are consuming at the same time. Guess what? It gets expensive, and now you have to reduce your standard of living or cut back on how many ribeyes you're going to be eating. All right. They all must diminish their expenditures in proportion to the new consumption, which will compel a large number of them to immigrate and seek a living elsewhere. Very interesting. By force or not, the property owners will dismiss many of them, and the rest will demand a wage increase in order to live as before. Sound very eerily strange to step back, close your ears, don't think about how it's happening, but think about what is happening. In this manner, that a considerable increase of money from the mines increases consumption, and by diminishing the number of inhabitants, greater expenditures result by those who remain. So you think about this, right? Here we have the top 20% of people who are increasing their consumption. This is because of the way the new money comes in. The majority of the people have to suffer the consequences and diminish their standard of living, diminish their, how much they consume. But yet the top 20% continue to do well. Right? By diminishing the number of inhabitants, the greater expenditures results for those who remain. Diminishing the number of inhabitants, greater expenditures result by those who remain. All right. If money continues to be extracted from the mines, if they continue to print the money, right? If the money continues to be extracted from the mines, the abundance of money will increase all prices to such a point that not only will property owners raise their rents considerably when the leases expire, right? And resume their old lifestyle, because there is no way that people like a diminished lifestyle. They like the elevated lifestyle, and there's nothing more beautiful than raising your lifestyle and nothing more painful than lowering it. The moment that you can get back into the old lifestyle of living at large, you're going to. So prices such to the point that owners will raise their rents considerable when their leases expires and resume their old lifestyles, increasing their servants' wages proportionately but the artisans and workmen will increase their prices of articles they produce so high that they will be considerable gains by buying them from foreigners who make them much cheaper. Dun, dun, dun. There goes your domestic manufacturers. You see what's happened here? Let me read it again. This is where it's important because so many people want to blame this on something else out there when yet here Cantillon says, hundreds of years ago and something that he recognized from hundreds of years before that. So you got to think this is thousands of years old. Yeah, because he was recognizing this from hundreds of years before he was doing it. It wasn't just like, just saying, hey, I'm going to invent this new way of doing economics. No, he was giving the report on what it was that he was documenting at the time. So let me read this again. If the money continues to be extracted from the mines, the abundance of money will increase all prices to such a point that not only will the property owners raise their rents considerably when the leases expire and resume their old lifestyles, increasing their servants' wages proportionally, but the artisans and workmen will increase their prices of articles they produce so high that there will be considerable gains in buying them from foreigners who make them much cheaper. This will naturally encourage several people to import products at lower prices from foreign factories, and this will gradually ruin the artisans and manufacturers of the state who will be unable to sustain themselves by working at such low rates because of the high cost of living. Damn. How many times have I tried to say it? Like, it's not me saying it. This is Cantillon saying it. Something that he recognized from hundreds of years before. He was writing this down in this book that he hundreds of years ago. This is how it goes down. Once you have pushed yourself to the point of no return like this, there is no going back. There's no recovery. Right? When the overabundance of money from the mines has diminished the number of inhabitants in the state, accustomed those who remain to excessive expenditures, everybody else who's left in town, like you got the people who can't make it. It's just like, sorry, guys. Sorry, you can't make it. Like I was here. Let me just take a break from this. I'm getting a little wound up. This caffeine here's got me a little jacked up. I think about this right myself. If I didn't have the YouTube channel and the support of the viewers at the time that I did a few years ago when I was buying this house, I would have had to leave this area because of the incredible cost of living and the ability to have a regular working class job and make it here was very difficult at the time. There was certainly no way I was going to be able to buy a house. But because I had the extra money, right, all the YouTube money and the support from the YouTube viewers, I was able to get into a house, which is not something that I believe that I would have been able to do otherwise. This is how it happens. It's because of this right here, right? When the overabundance of money from the mines has diminished the number of inhabitants, I would have had to leave. The overabundance of money in our area would have forced me to leave. The overabundance of money from the mines has diminished the number of inhabitants in the state. Everybody else has accustomed those remaining to excessive expenditures. So you just expect that everything around here is going to be expensive. Raised the price of farm products and wages for labor to high levels and ruined the manufacturers of the state by the purchases of foreign products by the property owners and the mine workers. The money produced by the mines. So think about this part right here. When now the money is really only, like you think about it, it has ruined, all this new money has come in. It has raised the cost of everything. The foreign production is now moved in and ruined the domestic manufacturers, right? So now who is it that's working this? When you replace the mine with the banking system, right? The central bank, the money printer, that's the mine. Think about what Cantillon says right here, right? Because just replace the miner with the banker, okay? Let's see, ruin the manufacturers of the state by purchases of foreign products by the property owners, right, and the mine workers. The money produced by the mines, the money produced by the banks, will necessarily go abroad to pay for the imports. Think about Triffin's dilemma right there. The money, this is Cantillon writing this hundreds of years ago. Think about Triffin's dilemma here today. All right. Those of you who don't recognize Triffin's dilemma is where an economist back in the day, Triffin, who had recognized that if you're going to be the world reserve currency, be the custodian of it, you have to figure out a way to get that money out there to the world. And the easiest way to do that is through deficit trade. So if you import more than you export, you'll import stuff and export money. Think about this. The mine workers, the money produced by the mines will necessarily go abroad to pay for the imports. This will gradually impoverish the state and make it, in a way, dependent on the foreigners to whom it is obligated to every year as it is extracted from the mines. This is, again, this will gradually impoverish the state. 80% of the people are going, why is it so painful right now? This new money gradually impoverishes the state. If you were making new money from the manufacturing, that increases the power and the wealth of the state. But when you have new money coming in from a continuous pouring in this case, the mines, right? Then it's a different story. The manufacturers, because we're replacing the mines with an abundance of new money coming in from the banking system, this has ruined the manufacturers and it has impoverished everybody in the state. The only people who is advantageous for are the people who are closest to the money and those who are bringing in the foreign production. This will gradually impoverish the state and make it, in a way, dependent on the foreigners to whom it is obligated to send money every year as it is extracted from the mines, as it is extracted from the banks. The great circulation of money, which was widespread in the beginning, ceases. Poverty and misery follows, and the exploitation of the mines appears to be only advantageous to those employed in them and to the foreigners who profit thereby. So again, this is the unfortunate situation we have now faced. See, back in Cantillon's day, it was gold and silver, and there would have been an eventual equilibrium, right? Because what would have happened is that all the gold would have been concentrated into one area, and then eventually it would have been redistributed out as the people buy stuff from the foreigners who were producing it. The great circulation of money, which was widespread in the beginning, ceases. Poverty and misery follows. See, when the money turns off, poverty and misery follows, and the exploitation of the mines only appears to be advantageous to those employed in them and to the foreigners who profit thereby. So everybody else gets skipped. See, all the people who got the money from the mines, they increase their consumption in a dramatic fashion, but they're increasing their consumption in buying foreign production. Everybody else down here, who is all the workmen trying to produce things to get the money, they're too expensive it's too expensive to live here. They can't earn enough to actually make it. And so it's only advantageous to people who have that money because they're closest to the mine, the foreigners, right? Who are bringing that stuff in. It's advantageous to them because they get access to the money too. Everybody else suffers the consequence. This is that huge separation that is happening. This is why we have the K. This is the K. This is Cantillon describing the K. Cantillon spelled was a C. He was describing the K way back in the day. It's Cantillon effect, not K. It's not a K economy. It's the Cantillon effect. Okay. Okay, so we got that part. Okay, here we go. This is approximately what happened in Spain since the discovery of the Indies. As for the Portuguese, since the discovery of the gold mines in Brazil, they have nearly always used foreign articles and manufactured goods. They have always used the Portuguese. Since the discovery of the gold mines in Brazil, they have nearly always used foreign articles and manufactured goods. It seems that they work the mines only for the account and the advantage of foreigners. So important. See, this is our situation. The United States is suffering something very similar to this right now. Cantillon was describing it because the Portuguese had discovered all this money, all this gold in Brazil. They have nearly always used foreign articles and manufactured goods, United States. And it seems that they work those mines, work those banking systems only for the account and the advantage of foreigners. All the gold and silver that these two states extract from the mines does not supply them with more precious metal in circulation than others, right? Because as soon as they get it, it goes right back out of the country again. It doesn't increase their wealth. It doesn't increase the amount that they have there. Uh, it does not increase them with more precious metal in circulation than others. England and France usually have even more. This is good stuff. I love Cantillon's essay. Hit that like button if you love Cantillon's essay too. Now, if the increase of money in the state comes from a balance of foreign trade, this is okay, this is the good stuff. This is the United States here, like, 50, 60 years ago. Actually, God, it's probably longer than that. I'm 50 years old, my Lord. It's like 60, 70 years ago. Now, if the increase of money in the state comes from the balance of foreign trade, i.e., from sending abroad articles and manufactured goods of greater value and quantity than is imported and consequently receiving in surplus in money, right? Trade deficits, the opposite. Trade surpluses. Importing less than you export. Export more than you import. This annual increase of money will enrich a great number of merchants and entrepreneurs in the state. It will give employment to numerous artisans and workmen who provide the goods and sent to the foreigner from whom the money is drawn. This will gradually increase the consumption of these industrious inhabitants and will raise the price of the land and labor. But the industrious people who are eager to acquire property will not at first increase their expenditures. They will wait until they have accumulated a large sum from which they have drawn a secure interest income independent of their occupation. Once a large number of inhabitants have acquired a considerable fortunes from this money, which enters the state regularly and annually, they will not fail to increase their consumption and raise the price of everything. Although these higher prices result in greater expenditures than they at first contemplated, they will, for the most part, continue so long as their capital lasts. For nothing is easier or more pleasant than to increase a family's expenditures, and nothing is more difficult or unpleasant than to decrease them. Think about that right there. That's the United States and the whole description of it rising as a manufacturing powerhouse and having the highest standard of living. It was described hundreds of years ago in a single paragraph. I will read it again just so that we can then look at it one more time. I'll break it down a little bit better. So we start again. The increase of money in the state comes from a balance of foreign trade. That was the United States. We manufactured all the world's greatest stuff, sent that stuff out there to the world, and the world sent us their money, right? i.e., from sending abroad articles and manufactured goods greater value and quantity than is imported, and consequently receiving the surplus in the money. This annual increase of money will enrich a great number of merchants and entrepreneurs in the state and will give employment to numerous artisans and workmen who provide the goods sent to the foreigner from whom the money is drawn. So you can see all this work is now starting to take place. Everybody is getting something, all right? Everybody's getting a piece of the pie. This will gradually increase consumption of these industrious inhabitants, right? We're all working, we're all making stuff, we're all selling it to the foreigners who are sending us money. We are all increasing our consumption, right? Increasing the consumption of the industrious inhabitants, the rise of the American standard of living. We're all doing it together, right? Okay. The consumption of the industrious inhabitants and will raise the price of land and labor. Here's the key part. This is the part that nobody wants to fess up to and say they didn't do, right? Because this is the part where people then want to point the finger and say, hey, they are the ones to blame. Here we go. But the industrious people who are eager to acquire property will not at increase their expenditures. They will wait until they have accumulated a large sum from which that they can draw a secure interest of income, independent of their occupation. That right there, those little capitalists right there that Cantillon was describing from way back in the day still exist today, and they get the blame for positioning themselves accordingly. They wanted to be property owners. They wanted to be independent of the state. They wanted a secure rate of interest that of beyond their occupation. They were eager, industrious people who did not at first increase their expenditures. Go hit the like button if you like that sentence. All right. Once a large number of inhabitants have acquired a considerable fortune from this money, which enters the state regularly and annually, they will not fail to increase the consumption and raise the price of everything. Although these higher prices result in a greater expenditures than they had at first contemplated, right? All of a sudden, even though they had postponed that expenditures at first, but once they did get into position, then they too will increase their consumption. And once they do, the prices will go up, and it's much more than they had contemplated it ever would have been, just like we hear today. Much more than they had ever contemplated. They will, for the most part, continue. Just like the top 20% continue to consume, they will continue so long as their capital lasts. Nothing is easier or more pleasant than to increase a family's expenditures, and nothing is more difficult or unpleasant than to decrease them, just like we experience today. Everybody knows exactly what that means. All right? Everybody knows exactly what that means. If an annual or continuous balance has caused a considerable increase of money in the state, it will not fail to increase consumption, raise the price of everything, and even diminish the number of inhabitants, unless additional products are drawn from abroad proportionate to the increase in consumption, right? So if you do not export your people, then you better import extra stuff, right? Because you have to have more stuff, or else the stuff is going to get super stupid expensive unless you have just ever increasing amounts of stuff coming in order for the inhabitants to acquire. Let me read it again. If an annual or continuous balance has caused a considerable increase of money in the state, it will not fail to increase consumption, raise the price of everything, and even diminish the number of inhabitants, unless additional products are drawn from abroad proportionate to the increase in consumption. Moreover, in states that have acquired a considerable abundance of money, it is natural to import many goods from neighboring countries where money is rare and consequently everything is cheap. This is what ends up happening. You have increased your consumption, increased the price of everything, and now the foreign production looks ever increasingly cheaper, right? Because that's what ends up happening. However, it is natural to import many goods from neighboring countries where the money is rare and consequently everything is cheap. However, as money must be exchanged for these products, the balance of trade will become smaller. The cheapness of land and labor in foreign countries where money is rare will naturally cause the building of factories and businesses. Let me read it again. The cheapness of land and labor in foreign countries where money is rare will naturally cause the building of factories and businesses similar to those of the state, but will not at first be as perfect or highly valued. Cheap Chinese stuff, American quality, right? See, he says the same thing. He wrote this before there was even a United States. I mean, he knew about the Americas, but it was just really just primitive stuff taking place. Hundreds of years ago, he wrote this stuff. It's awesome. All right. In this situation, the state can retain its abundance of money. In this situation, the state can retain its abundance of money, consume all its own products and a great deal of foreign products, and over and above all this, maintain a small balance of trade against a foreigner or at least keep a balanced level for many years. In other words, the state will import in exchange for its commodities and manufactured goods as much money from these foreign countries as it sends to them for the goods and or products of the land it takes from them. If the state is a maritime state, the easiness and low cost of its shipping for the transport of its commodities and manufactured goods to foreign countries may compensate in some way for the high cost of labor caused by the overabundance of money. Therefore, the commodities and manufactured goods of the state, expensive though they may be, will continue to sell to foreign countries and sometimes will be cheaper than the manufactured goods of another state where labor is paid less. So, understanding that there is a way that you can continue on with your manufacturing so long as you keep that balance of trade. And even if you are more expensive, if you got the lower cost shipping, the efficiency of the supply chain, you built up the partnership, you can still do it. But once that is over, it's over, right? I mean, this is the way that you can maintain it, even if you are more expensive. The cost of transport greatly increases the price of goods sent to distant countries. However, these costs are very moderate in maritime states where there is regular shipping to all foreign ports, and the ships are nearly always found there ready to sail, taking on board all cargoes entrusted to them at a very reasonable freight. So what he is saying there is like the bigger this, as far as you having your own personal shipping channel, awesome. But the shipping channels that are growing at the time and you have access to them, you have the access to them just like everybody else does. And so, essentially everybody's paying the same price, the same reasonable freight. Right? Not always. If you can figure it out and you got that, you got the edge on it, then you got something unique. All right. This is not so where navigation does not flourish. There, it is necessary to build ships especially for transportation of goods, and this sometimes absorbs all the profit. And transportation there is always very expensive, which entirely discourages commerce. England today consumes not only most of its own small production, but also a large amount of foreign products such as silks, wines, fruits, linens, in great quantity, etc. Meanwhile, she sends abroad the products of her mines and manufactured goods for the most part. No matter how expensive labor is due to the abundance of money, she does not fail to sell her products to distant countries because her maritime advantage, at prices as reasonable as those of France, where these same products are cheaper. So again, they have expensive products, but because they can distribute them, they're able to continue on operations just the same as they always had. The increased quantity of money in the state may also be caused without a balance of trade by subsidies paid to the state by foreign powers, by the expenditures of several ambassadors or travelers wanting to stay there for political reasons, curiosities, or pleasure, or by the transfer of property and wealth of families who choose to leave their country to seek religious freedom or for other reasons and to settle down in the state. So basically, just people showing up with money. That's literally what it means. This paragraph right here is literally saying there's people showing up with money. Not like a manufacturing, not anything like that. Just, people just traveling, political reasons, curiosities, and pleasures. All right. In all these cases, the sums enter the state always causes an increase in expenditures and consumption, and consequently increases the prices of all goods in channels of exchange where the money enters. Before the increase in the quantity of money, suppose that a quarter of the inhabitants of the state consume meat, wine, beer, etc. on a daily basis and frequently acquire clothes, linens, etc. But after the increase, a third or half of the inhabitants consume these same things. Prices for these goods will increase, and high price for meat will convince several of those who formed the original quarter to consume less meat than usual. Right. So essentially, it started off with just a quarter of the inhabitants, but all this money came in. Now there's a lot more consumption. Half the inhabitants are now buying into it, and they have risen the price of meat. Now the first quarter has to reduce the amount that they were eating before because of the new people coming in with their money, right? Or because of the new money coming into the people. All right, prices for these goods will increase in the half price of the meat will convince several of those who had formed the original quarter to consume less meat than usual. A man who eats 3 pounds of meat daily, good Lord, 3 pounds of meat daily will manage with 2 pounds, but he feels the reduction. Meanwhile, the other half of the inhabitants who hardly ate any meat at all will not feel the reduction because all of a sudden now they're eating meat. You see, the new money came in, they had access to it like they didn't before, and now they increased their consumption. All of a sudden they're getting into meat. They never had meat before. The first half has to reduce, and now the next half gets to come in and buy some. So they don't feel this reduction. Isn't that funny? Like everybody else is like, man, I feel the pain and suffering from this. And other people are like, what are you talking about? The increase in prices? Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah. I'm just kidding. All right. The price. All right. Let me read that again. Meanwhile, the other half of the inhabitants who hardly ate any meat at all will not feel the reduction. The price of the bread, the people who never ate it at all to begin with. Okay. The price of bread will increase gradually because of increased consumption, as I have often suggested, but it will be proportionally less expensive than the meat. The increase in the price of meat is noticeably felt because it causes a reduction in consumption on part of a smaller portion of the people, but the increased price in bread is less noticeable because it decreased the consumption in the spread across the entire population. Okay, so now this is important to kind of internalize itself. So a certain amount of the population only ate the meat, right? As the increase in consumption then reduced the amount of meat that this portion of the population got to eat, the rest of the people who never really ate meat to begin with, they didn't feel the reduction at all, right? They didn't feel it. But now everybody eats bread, right? Even the people who were eating meat, they eat bread too, and the people who didn't have the ability to eat meat, they were definitely eating bread. So like everybody essentially was eating bread. And now the reduction in bread consumption would be across everybody, right? Not just the meat eaters, but everybody all at once. The increase in the price of meat is noticeably felt because it causes a reduction in the consumption on the part of a small portion of the people. That smaller portion of the people, they felt it. But the increased price of bread is less noticeable because the decreased consumption is spread across the entire population. If 100,000 extra people move to the state with 10 million inhabitants, the extra consumption of bread will amount to only 1 pound in 100, which must be subtracted from the old inhabitants. But when a man consumes 99 pounds of bread for his subsistence instead of 100, he hardly feels the reduction. Right? Because it was such a small amount spread out across such a vast amount of people that the actual feeling of the reduction was very minimal considering the abundance of bread that's out there. Right? But when a man consumes 99 pounds of bread for his subsistence instead of 100, he hardly feels a reduction. When the consumption of meat increases, it's only the things that are limited that you actually feel, right? When the consumption of meat increases, farmers increase the size of their pastures to produce more meat, and this diminishes cropland and consequently the amount of wheat produced. However, what generally causes meat to become proportionally more expensive than bread is that imports of foreign wheat are usually permitted, while imports of beef are absolutely forbidden, as in the case in England, or heavy import duties are imposed, as is in other states. This is the reason why the rents of meadows and pastures rise in England, and the abundance of money, the abundance of money 3 times more than the rents of cropland. That's because of how much more they get for the meat there. There is no doubt that when ambassadors, travelers, and families move to a state, the increased consumption will cause higher prices in all the markets where they spend their money. As for the subsidies the state has received from foreign powers, they are either hoarded for the state's necessities or are put into circulation. If we assume they are hoarded, they do not concern my argument, for I am considering only money in circulation. Hoarded money, silverware, churches' money, etc., are resources that the state turns to in emergency situations, but are no present utility. If the state puts these funds into circulation, it can only do so by spending them, and this will certainly increase consumption and raise the price of all goods. Whoever receives the money will set it in motion the principal businesses of life, which is the food, either for himself or someone else, since everything else is connected to this directly or indirectly. All right, so that was chapter 6. Got through it. Good stuff. Absolutely love Cantillon's theory. Let's kind of go through. We got an hour into this live stream already. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. So many comments, 181 people watching, 80 thumbs up. Thank you so much for hitting that thumbs up button. All right, Cantillon wrote a theory on human behavior and its reflection in economic patterns. All right, it's not generational issue, it's human nature. Yeah. All right, you guys enjoying this? If you guys are enjoying this, want me to continue on, continue to hit that like button. We got 85 likes with 178 people watching. We're about ready to dive into chapter 7, more on the increase and decrease in the quantity of money in the state. By breaking these 3 chapters down on Cantillon's essay, we are getting a better understanding of the flow of money, how it goes into the system, what's driving out the domestic manufacturers, what increases the prices, and what it is that we can do about it when we recognize where we are in this cycle and how it is that we can fit ourselves into it in the most appropriate fashion. So again, continue to hit that like button. Let's get it up over 100 likes and continue down the road of Cantillon's essay. Oh, what does that say there? It says, I'm starting to think Simon is related to the spiritual reincarnation of Cantillon. Yeah, it's just like thinking about coming up with my own theory on economics. Call it Coronian economics, right? Sounds too harsh. All right. When there is an increase in the quantity of money, prices will increase depending on how the new money holders decide to spend their money. The price changes will also be affected by such things as regulations on trade and the perishability of the products that are traded. In other words, the simple quantity theory of money is naive in proposing that a doubling of the quantity of money would double the prices equally. Changes in the quantity of money will change relative prices and have real effect on the economy, a phenomenon known as the Cantillon effect. So now this is the key to it. This is the key to understanding why the prices do not necessarily go up when the money goes up. It's a matter of the consumption and the direction in which that consumption is moving. When you recognize this, then you can recognize how it is that those prices move and how you can deal with that situation. But then when you want to blame it on things, it makes it so much more difficult. Recognizing the underlying economic forces makes it so much easier, right? And then you don't have to try and give an opinion to it. It's just an is or isn't, All right, here we go. Let's just move on. You guys form your own opinions on this one. Okay, here we go. Where gold, silver, and copper are extracted from the mines, they have an intrinsic value proportional to the land and labor that they enter into their production. States that have no mines have an added cost of importing the metal. The quantity of money like that of all other commodities, determines its value against all other goods in the bargaining process of the marketplace. If England if England begins for the first time to make use of gold, silver, copper, and exchanges, money will be valued according to the quantity in circulation, proportionally to its power of exchange against all other merchandise and products. The bargaining process of the market will determine this estimation of value on the basis of this estimation. On the basis of this estimation, the property owners and entrepreneurs will set the wages of their domestic servants and the workmen at so much a day or year so that they and their families may be able to live on the wages they receive. Let's now assume that because the ambassadors of foreign travelers residing in England has been introduced into circulation as there was before, thereby doubling the quantity of money. This money will pass first into the hands of various artisans, servants, entrepreneurs, and others who have had a share in providing transportation, amusement, etc. for these foreigners. So if these foreigners come in with a whole bunch of money and they're going to hang out there in this particular area, the people who have first access to it are the people who are providing them with goods, services, and entertainment and all that. They're the first ones to get the money. All right. Manufacturers, farmers, and other entrepreneurs will feel the effect of the increased money, which will increase the expenditures of a great number of people, and this will in turn increase market prices. Even the children of these entrepreneurs and artisans will enjoy the new expenditures. With this abundance of money, their fathers will give them a little money for their petty pleasures, and they will buy cakes and meat pies, etc. This new quantity of money will be distributed so that many who lived without using money before will now have some. Many exchanges, which used to be made on credit by valuation, will now be made with cash, and that will increase the pace of circulation of money in England compared to before. So again, just kind of talking about the way that money flows in, and that if it does flow in, the people who have first access to it will begin to spend it and increase their expenditures. And even like, giving fathers, with this abundance of money, their fathers will give them, even the children. Yeah, here it goes. Even the children of these entrepreneurs and artisans uh, will enter into new expenditures. With this abundance of money, their fathers will give them little money for their petty pleasures, and they will buy cakes and meat pies, etc. And that's what happens when the new money comes in. People are like, woohoo, new money, let's go have some fun. Here you go, boys. Take this and go have a good time. All right. I conclude from all this that by doubling the quantity of money in a state, the prices of products and merchandise are not always doubled. The river which runs and winds about its bed will not flow with double the speed when the amount of water is doubled. The change in relative prices introduced by the increased quantity of money in the state will depend on how this money is directed at the consumption in circulation. No matter who obtains the new money, it will naturally increase consumption. No matter who obtains the new money, it will naturally increase consumption. However, this consumption will be greater or less according to circumstances. It will more or less be directed towards certain kinds of commodities or merchandise according to the judgment of those who acquire the money. Market prices will increase more or certain goods will increase more for certain goods than for others. However abundant the money may, no matter however abundant the money may be. Good Lord. All right. Let me try that one more time. Market prices will increase more for certain goods than others, however abundant the money may be. In England, The price of meat might triple, but the price of wheat might increase less than one-fourth. In England, it is still permitted to import wheat from foreign countries, but not cattle. For this reason, however great the increase of money may be in England, the price of wheat can only be raised above the price in other countries where money is scarce by the cost and risk of importing wheat from these foreign countries. So that's important. Again, we had touched on that earlier, in that you might have like a huge increase in the cost of or your huge increase in money supply, but it doesn't necessarily going to cause an increase of all commodities, because the foreigner who is producing that commodity is still selling it at the same cheap price, and you're just not going to be able to, raise your prices beyond what it is that the foreigner is going to provide it to you for. So even though you have increased the price of certain things because it's very limited, other things, which is essentially limitless, doesn't get the same increase in price. Like, it's not necessarily destruction of dollar that does it, right? It's demand and how much supply. That's the key. It is not the same with the price of cattle, which will necessarily be proportioned to the quantity of money offered for meat in relation to the quantity of meat and the number of cattle raised there. So again, like, they have limitations on how much cattle can come into the country. An ox weighing 800 pounds sells in Poland and Hungary for 2 or 3 ounces of silver, but commonly sells in the London market for more than 40. Yet the bushel of flour does not sell in London for even double the price in Poland or Hungary. So essentially they're saying, like, it's 10 times the price in England, in London, for this same ox weighing 800 pounds in Poland and Hungary, but yet the bushel of flour is practically the same price. An increase of money only increases the price of commodities and merchandise by the difference in the cost of transport, when this transport is allowed. But in many cases, transportation would cost more than the good is worth. Therefore, for example, timber is usually in many places is useless in many places. The cost of transportation is also the reason why milk, fresh butter, lettuce, game, etc. are almost given away in the provinces distant from the capital. Right? The closer you get to the capital, the more expensive that stuff gets. But if you're out in the middle of the boonies, game and milk and lettuce and stuff, that's like, that's all over the place. That's cheap, right? But you take it into the city and it gets expensive. I conclude that an increase of actual money in a state always causes an increase of consumption and a routine of greater expenditures. But the higher prices caused by this money does not affect all commodities and merchandise equally. Prices do not rise proportionally to the quantity of money, unless what has been added continues in the same circulation channels as before. In other words, those who offered 1 ounce of silver in the market would be the same and only ones to offer 2 ounces when the amount of money in circulation is doubled, and that is hardly ever the case. I recognize that when a large surplus of money is introduced in a state, the new money gives a new direction to consumption and even a new speed to circulation. However, it is not possible to say exactly to what extent. So that is important to understand. Like, the increase and decrease of money to the state, the Chapter 7, explaining how it is that the increase of prices takes place and not proportionally or equal to the amount of new money coming into the system, is very critical to understanding the underlying economic forces. I mean, that right there, that chapter is so telling, because it's so easy just to wipe your hands clean of the whole idea and say, money printer go off, prices go up. What else do you need to know? Well, Cantillon describes it in a way that says, yeah, just because you have increased the money doesn't necessarily mean you're going to increase prices. You have to increase consumption. Increasing consumption then throws the supply-demand imbalances off, and now you have increased prices. Limitation of items and an increase in consumption will increase the prices. But if you have an increase in money and you have all the ability to consume because there's no limitation on the amount that you can consume, then the prices don't necessarily go up in proportion to the money increase. All right. So important because it's just easy to just give it up and just say, oh man, the money printer go off, prices go up. Anything else is just naive thinking. And it's just like, no, it's really naive thinking that, right? Because even Cantillon was describing it from not even having a money printer, talking about how new money and abundance of new money coming in doesn't necessarily cause prices to go up in all directions, right? It's the added consumptions that's doing it. If you can increase consumption in all channels at once, then yeah, you would. Think about what COVID really did. I mean, it severed the supply chain and handed stimulus packages out in every direction. I mean, that was adding consumption in all channels at once. All right, you guys having fun? We got 155 people still watching this live stream. Thank you so much for joining in on tonight's live stream, breaking down monetary theory, the increase and decrease of money to the state, knowing that we are past the point of no return, the manufacturers are not coming back, knowing why they're not coming back, knowing exactly how the prices are increasing, and what it is that we are going to do about it going into the future. We're going to find out about that here in Chapter 8, because this is the final chapter of this little 3-part series, the increase and decrease of money to the state. Chapter 8, the further reflections on the increase and decrease of money to the state. Okay. Increases in the supply of money from the balance of trade eventually causes prices to rise. This in turn puts pressure on domestic producers and increases imports. The result is that the balance of trade is reduced and eventually is negative. This is Cantillon's price-specie flow mechanism, which demonstrates the reason for the tendencies for equilibrium in the international monetary flows. The balance of trade can result in economic power. Thus, also, the economy lapses into luxury and decline. All right. So, starting it all off, this is how I have been trying to tell people and suggesting to people that they need to do something with. I thought, oh, I did. Okay. No, I didn't. Dang it. Thought I brought my my charger out here with me. Let me see how much battery we got left here. All right, we got enough to get through this last chapter here. Keep hitting that like button, guys. All right. So this is where I keep trying to say it. The move into luxuries is the problem, right? And if you wanted to key it down to one thing, it's the move into luxuries, the luxurious experience. If it wasn't for the luxurious experience, the problems that we face would not be taking place. Excuse me. And this chapter explains it. So let's knock it out before my camera dies, because apparently I didn't bring up my charger with me, which I thought I did. But that's not the right charger. All right. Anyway, let's do it. All right. We have seen that the quantity of money circulating in a state may be increased by working its mines, by subsidies from foreign powers, by immigration of foreign families, by the residence of ambassadors and travelers, but above all, by the regular and annual balance of trade, from supplying goods to foreigners, and by receiving from them at least part of the price in gold and silver, in price in gold and silver. It is by this last means that the state grows most substantially, especially when its trade is accompanied and supported by ample shipping and by a significant output of the raw materials necessary for the production of exported manufactured goods. So right there, this is where Cantillon says is the biggest abundance of money is going to come into the state is if you can produce some awesome stuff. You produce the most, you get the most out there to the world, and the world is going to send you the money, and that is the best position to be in. However, the continuation of this commerce gradually introduces a great abundance of money, and little by little increases consumption. Foreign products must be imported to meet this demand and must be paid for by the reduction in the annual balance of trade, meaning that when you start bringing in the foreign production, you're exporting the domestic manufacturers. Foreign products must be imported to meet the demand and must be paid for by the reduction in the annual balance of trade. On the other hand, increased expenditures increase the cost of labor and the prices of manufactured goods. It often happens that some foreign countries try to set up the same kind of factories for themselves, in which case they stop buying those of the state in question. So even you were producing all this wonderful stuff, right? And you were sending it out there to the world, and then this foreign country produced the same thing you're producing. So they may not be like you may not be selling it to the or buy they may not be buying it from how am I trying to say? Once they set it up, they are no longer buying it from you, right? Like before they were buying it from you and now they set it up and although they may not be as good, they have stopped purchasing from you. That means you no longer get the new money coming in from your production, right? Although these new established factories and manufacturers are not perfect at first, they reduce and even prevent the export of those goods from the neighboring states. So all of a sudden, your neighbors that you were selling to, you're not selling to them anymore, right? From the neighboring states into their own country where they can be acquired at a better price. So all of a sudden, you just lost your customer because the foreign producer is doing it cheaper. In this manner, the state begins to lose some branches of its profitable trade, and many of its workmen and artisans who lose their jobs will leave the state to find employment in the new foreign factories. In spite of this diminution in the balance of trade, the custom of importing various products will continue. Right? That's what I love. In spite of this diminution in the balance of trade, the custom of importing various products will continue. See, people want to blame politics or whatever. All right? Cantillon talked about it from hundreds of years ago. This is what's going to happen. If the manufactured products of the state have a great reputation and can be shipped to distant countries at a low cost, the state will maintain its advantage over the new foreign manufacturers for many years and will maintain a small balance of trade or keep it even. If, however, some other maritime state tries to perfect the same articles, its navigation, its ability to transport, at the same time, it will, because of its cheapness of its manufacturers, take away several branches of trade from the state in question. Consequently, like this is what happened to the United States, right? We were the manufacturing powerhouse. They started manufacturing. It was like, we make better stuff, but we're not selling it to them anymore. Time went on, they started selling it to the neighbors. Well, we could ship it better than they can. Well, pretty soon we lost that too. Okay? Consequently, the state will begin to lose its balance of trade and will be forced to send a part of its money abroad every year in order to pay for its imports. And there's the United States, right? In trade imbalance. Moreover, even if the state in question could keep a balance of trade, hold on. Moreover, even if the state in question could keep a balance of trade and its greater abundance of money, it is reasonable to suppose that this abundance will plunge many wealthy individuals into luxury. Moreover, even if the state could, right, keep its balance of trade, the great abundance of money that constantly flows in, it is reasonable to suppose that this abundance of money, right, will plunge many wealthy individuals into luxury. Absolutely, it would. Think about the new money that comes in, the people who have access to it, and what it is they're doing. The top 20% of the people are doing 80%, 70% of the consumption. They are wealthy individuals into luxuries. That's why I keep saying it's the problem. They will buy paintings, precious stones from abroad. It doesn't matter what it is they're buying something from abroad, right? Money goes over there. They will want silks and rare objects. And they set such an example of luxury in the state that in spite of the advantages of its ordinary trade, its money will flow abroad annually to pay for this luxury. It's the luxuries that are sending money over abroad because people want to live a high life, right? They want all the wonderfulness that everybody else has to make. All right. This will gradually impoverish the state and cause it to pass from great power to great weakness. That's why I keep saying it's the luxuries. The luxuries are doing it. It'll cause the people to buy stuff from foreign producers. It will impoverish the state at some point. All right. Great power to great weakness. When the state has arrived at its highest point of wealth, and I always assume that the comparative wealth of the state consists mainly in their represented quantities of money, it will inevitably fall back into poverty by the ordinary course of things. When a state has arrived at its highest point of wealth, when you can no longer have the new money coming in, when the money printer turns off, when the mine closes down, when the imports are when you're no longer exporting, when the new money turns off, however that you want to look at that, whether one way or the other, right? When the new money turns off, when the state has arrived at its highest point of wealth, and I always assume that comparative wealth of the state consists mainly in their respective quantities of money, it will inevitably fall back into poverty by the ordinary course of things. The too great of abundance of money, which gives power to the state so long as it lasts, throws them back imperceptibly but naturally into poverty. Thus, it would seem that when a state expands by trade and the abundance of money raises the price of land and labor, the prince or the legislator ought to withdraw money from circulation, keep it for emergencies, and try to slow down its circulation by every means. Accept compulsion and bad faith to prevent its goods from becoming too expensive and avoid the drawbacks of luxury. This is this is his suggestion. The only thing that he suggests, right, in the entire thing, everything is just recognizing it. That's what he suggests. Thus, it would seem that when a state expands by trade and the abundance of money raises the price of land and labor, the prince or the legislator ought to withdraw money from circulation, keep it for emergencies, and try to slow down its circulation by every means, except compulsion and bad faith, to prevent its goods from becoming too expensive and avoid the drawbacks of luxury. However, it is not easy to perceive the opportune time for this, or to know when money has become more abundant than it ought to be for the good and the preservation of the advantages of the state. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Oh man, no, just keep bringing it in. Keep bringing the new money in. We're like, look, I got a new car, and you got a new house, and you got new clothes, and you got good food. Keep bringing the money in. We don't know how much we can bring in. Just keep bringing it in. We'll figure it out, right? That move into luxury is what's doing it. However, it is not easy to perceive the opportune time for this, or to know when the money has become more abundant than it ought to be for the good and preservation of the advantages of the state. Therefore, princes and heads of republics do not concern themselves with this sort of knowledge, and strive only to make use of the abundance of their state revenue to extend their power and to insult other countries on the most frivolous pretext. Some things just never change, do they? They do not concern themselves with this. They don't concern themselves. They do not concern themselves with this sort of knowledge, and strive only to make use of the abundance of their state revenue to extend their power and to insult other countries on the most frivolous pretext. China's the cheap ripper offerer, right? Tired of them ripping off the United States. We're going to make them pay their fair share, insulting other countries on the most frivolous of pretexts. Okay, all things considered, working to perpetuate the glory of their reigns and administration, and in leaving monuments of their power and wealth, is perhaps the best that they can do. This is him diving in and tearing these politicians apart. They really have no, they really are neither good nor bad. They make a bunch of noise to this. This is what it comes down to. All things considered, working to perpetuate their glory of their reigns and administrations and leaving monuments of their power and wealth is perhaps the best that they can do, because according to the natural course of humanity, the state must collapse on its own. It's not the politicians who are going to collapse it. It must collapse on its own. It's going to do it anyway, inevitably, right? Inevitably, by the ordinary course of things. Natural course of humanity, the state must collapse on its own. They only accelerate its fall by a little. They only accelerate the fall by a little. This was going to happen anyway. It's due to the abundance of money and the luxurious experience that people must have had, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have been here. Nevertheless, it seems that they should try to make their power last during their times of their own administration. Few years are needed to raise the abundance to the highest point in the state. However, still fewer are needed to bring it into poverty for the lack of commerce and manufacturing. Without speaking of the rise and the fall of the Venice Republic and the Hanseatic cities, Flanders and Brabant, the Dutch Republic, who have succeeded each other in profitable branches of trade, one may say that France's power has only been on the rise from 1646, when factories were established to produce clothing which had previously been imported, to 1684, when the number of Protestants, entrepreneurs, and artisans were driven out of France. The kingdom has done nothing but recede since this date. I know no better measure than the leases and rents of the property owners to judge the abundance and scarcity of money in circulation. When land is leased at high rates, it's a sign that there is plenty of money in the state. But when land has to be leased at much lower rates, it shows, other things being equal, that money is scarce. I have read that the state of France, that acres of vineyards near Mantes, not far from the French capital, which leased for 200 livres of full weight in 1660, only leased for 100 of the lighter money in the 1700s. However, the silver brought from the West Indies in intervals should naturally have raised the price of land in Europe. The author of The State of France attributes this fall in rent to defective consumption. In fact, it seems he observed the reduction in wine consumption. However, I think he is mistaken the effect for the cause. The cause was the great rarity of money in France, and the effect of this was naturally a decrease in consumption. In this essay, I have always suggested, on the contrary, that an abundance of money naturally increases consumption and contributes above all else to higher valuation of the land, right? Increase the consumption. This guy was saying, oh man, there's a problem. It's obviously it was the reduction in wine. What he was noticing was a reduction in the consumption, and that was due to the lack of money. Okay? I have always suggested, on the contrary, and that the abundance of money naturally increases consumption and contributes above everything else to higher valuation of the land. When an abundant money raises products to honest prices, the inhabitants eagerly work to acquire them, although they do not show the same eagerness to acquire food and merchandise beyond what is needed for their maintenance. That still exists today. How many people complain about it? It's just like, man, my job doesn't pay enough. Well, do you have a job? I mean, do you rent an apartment? Yeah. Do you have a car? Yeah. Do you buy food? Yeah. Well, then what else are you doing? Nothing. My job doesn't pay enough. Yeah, because most people only work to acquire what is to achieve their maintenance. This has been going on for hundreds of years. Nothing changes. right? It's the people who realize they need to go beyond that of what it is that they are working for. They need money beyond the money they're already making, right? They need extra money, but hardly anybody does that. Right? When abundant money raises products to honest prices, the inhabitants eagerly work to acquire them, although they do not show the same eagerness to acquire food and merchandise beyond that what is needed for their maintenance. It is clear that a state with more money in circulation than its neighbors has an advantage over them, so long as it maintains this abundance of money. It is clear that a state with more money in circulation than its neighbor has an advantage over them so long as it maintains this abundance of money. In the first place, given the price of land and labor are circulated in terms of money, the state where money is most abundant will give up less land and labor than it receives in all areas of trade. Thus, the state in question sometimes receives the product of 2 acres of land in exchange for that of 1 acre, and the work of 2 men for that of only 1. It is because of this abundance of money in circulation in London that the work of 1 English embroiderer costs more than that of 10 Chinese embroiderers, right? So some people are like, they say how much you get paid. Well, it depends on where you're actually working at. Here in London, what he is talking about, there's so much money in circulation that the amount that an embroiderer gets paid in London is that of what 10 Chinese embroiderers make in China, right? So again, it depends on how much money is in circulation and, how much demand for the worker is. English embroiderer costs more than 10 Chinese embroiderers, although the Chinese embroiderer much better and churn out more work in a day. In Europe, people are amazed that these people can live by working so cheap and that their wonderful fabrics they send us cost so little. Secondly, tax revenues are more easily raised in a state where money is plentiful and in relatively large amounts. See, this is where a lot of people key in on all the abundance of money in the United States, is it's easy to increase tax revenues, right? Thus gives the state, in case of war or dispute, the means to gain all sorts of advantages over its adversaries with whom money is scarce. If there are two princes at war over the sovereignty or conquest of a state, where one has much money and the other has little money but many estates worth twice the money of his enemy, the first will be better able to attract generals and officers with gifts of money than the second will be by giving twice the value in lands in the estate. So what he's saying there is that if you go to war, money talks, right? You can offer them up all the land you want, but money talks, and it's going to be worth twice as much as the land is. All right. Grants of land are subject to challenge and revocation and cannot be relied upon like money. With money, munitions of war and food can be bought, even from the enemies of the state. Money can be given for secret services without witness, but land, produce, and goods would not serve for these purposes. Not even jewelry or diamonds, because they are easily recognized. After all, it seems to me that the comparative power of wealth of the state consists, other things being equal, the greater or less abundance of money circulating within them. I still have to mention 2 other methods of increasing the amount of money circulating in a state. First is when entrepreneurs and private individuals borrow from their foreign correspondents at interest, or when foreigners send their money into the state to buy shares of government stock. Very interesting. This is where they're going down the borrowing path, where you borrow the money, right? I still have to mention 2 other methods of increasing the amount of money circulating in the state. The first is when entrepreneurs and private individuals borrow money from their foreign correspondents at interest, or when foreigners send their money into the state to buy shares of government stock. This often amounts to a very considerable sums on which the state must annually pay interest to these foreigners. These methods for increasing the money in the state do not make it more abundant. I'm sorry. The money in the state do make it more abundant and diminish the rate of interest. With this money, the entrepreneurs in the state find it possible to borrow more cheaply, to provide work, and to establish factories in the anticipation of profit. The artisans and all those whose hands this money passes through consume more than they would have done if they had not been employed by the means of this money. This consequently increases prices just as if the money belonged to the state, and through the increased consumption or expenditures, this causes public revenues derived from the taxes on consumptions are increased. Money lent to the state in this manner brings many advantages with it, but in the end, it always burdensome and harmful. The state must pay the interest to the foreigners every year, and aside from the loss, the state is at the mercy of the foreigners, who can always cause trouble if they decide to withdraw their capital. Sure, like this is where abandoning the dollar, like you know, uh, de-dollarization. This is like the whole concept right here. Again, Cantillon describes this stuff from hundreds of years ago. Surely they will want to withdraw their capital when the state needs it the most and when preparing for war and defeat is feared. The interest paid to the foreigner is always much more considerable than the increase in public revenue caused by this money, right? The interest that you pay is always more considerable than the increase in public revenue caused by the money. One can observe these loans passing from one country to another according to investors' confidence in the states to which they are sent. But in reality, states that have paid heavy interest on these loans for many years will often find themselves bankrupt and unable to repay the capital. When trust is shaken, shares or public stock fall, for foreign shareholders do not like to sustain losses, preferring to content themselves with collecting interest while waiting for confidence to return. But sometimes it does not return. In declining states, the principal objective of public administrators usually is to restore confidence in order to attract foreign loans. If the ministry does not act in bad faith and keeps its obligations, the money of the subjects will circulate without interruption. In this case, money from abroad has power of increasing the quantity of money in the state. This is what the United States has gone through. Right? They keep, keeping the public confidence going, making sure that the foreign buyers keep going. This is the road that they went down, and it's a huge amount of money that now comes in. You don't have to produce anything. You just have to borrow it. And this is massive amounts that comes in. But the borrowing road, which holds an advantage in the present, leads to a dead end and is but a flash in the pan. To restore a poor state with a shortage of money, a constant and real balance of trade is needed on an annual basis, and is the development through navigation of its articles and manufacturers produced cheaper and thereby suitable for exportation. So the only way to fix this is to lower your standard of living and get back into being a manufacturer, right? Which is the hold at the present is a dead end. To restore a poor state with a shortage of money, a constant and real balance of trade is needed, right? Through navigation and manufactured produced cheaper. Produced goods cheaper. Okay. Merchants are the first to make their fortunes, then the lawyers may get their part. The prince and tax collectors get a share at the expense of all others and distribute their graces as they please. When money becomes too plentiful in the state, luxuries will follow and the state will fall into poverty. This is roughly the cycle that This is roughly the cycle that may be experienced by a large state which has both capital and inhabitants. A talented public administrator is always able to begin the cycle over again. Not many years are needed to see it tried and succeeded, at least in the beginning, which makes for the most interesting situation. The increased quantity of circuit. Oh, geez, hold on, guys. Don't go away. Don't die on me. I'm almost done here. I think this battery has just enough left in it, so. Stay. Oh. Isn't this the way it always goes? This is UE style right here. Stay there. Don't go anywhere. All right. All right, I'm getting a little stiff here. Okay. This is roughly the cycle that may be experienced by a large state which has both capital and industrious inhabitants. A talented public administrator is always able to begin the cycle over again. Not many years are needed to see it tried and succeeded, at least in the beginning, which makes for the most interesting situation. The increased quantity of money in circulation will be brought about by several factors that my argument does not allow for me to examine now. As for the state without much capital and where capital can only be increased by accidents or by particular circumstances of the times, it is difficult to find the means that would allow them to flourish by trade. No administrator can restore the republics of Venice and Holland to the brilliant situation from which that they have fallen. But Italy, Spain, France, and England, however poor they may be, are still capable of attaining a high degree of power by trade alone if they led by a good administration and if they operate separately. If all these states were equally well administered, they would be great only in proportion to their respective capital and to the greater or lesser industriousness of their people. So again, like, how is it that you get the new money in, right? If you had great administrators who were able to keep it all balanced and keep it perfect, then maybe, but ultimately it comes down to the luxurious experiences that the people end up going into and how industrious and to what degree they are. The last method I can think of to increase the quantity of money actually circulating in the state is by violence and arms. In this method, it is often blended with others. Since all peace treaties, one will try to maintain trading rights and other privileges one could obtain. When a state mandates contributions or makes several other states tributary to it, this is a very sure method of obtaining their money. I will not examine the method of putting these theories into practice, but I will say that all the nations that have flourished in this manner have not failed to decline, like states that have flourished through their commerce. The ancient Romans were more powerful in this manner than all the peoples we know of. Nevertheless, these same Romans, before losing an inch of their land in their vast estates, fell into decadence through luxuries and impoverished themselves by the reduction of money which circulated among them. And it was this luxury that caused their empire to pass into the hands of the eastern nations of the Orient, right? Because it's always about luxuries. It's the luxurious experience. If you didn't go into buying a luxurious experience, what would you have done with the money? You would have deployed it into a return of some kind of investment back into something here, right? Instead, we bought all the wonderful stuff of foreign producers. That's just the way it happens. It's the way Cantillon describes it, and it's the way that it went down. All right, so long as Romans' luxury, which did not begin until after the defeat of Antiochus, king of Asia, around the AUC 564, came from the product of the land and the labor of all the vast estates of their dominion. The circulation of money only increased instead of decreasing. The public was in possession of all the gold, silver, and copper mines in the empire. They had the gold mines of Asia, Macedonia, and Aquilia, and the rich mines, both gold and silver, of Spain and other countries. They had several mints where gold and silver copper coins were struck, In Rome, the consumption of all goods and merchandise drawn from their vast provinces did not diminish the circulation of money any more than the picture, statues, and jewels themselves. Although the wealthy landlords spent excessive amounts for their feasts and paid 15,000 ounces of silver for a single fish, all that did not diminish the quantity of money circulating in Rome, given that the provinces made tributes regularly, not to mention that the money brought in by the lenders and by the governors with their extortions. The amounts annually extracted from the mines increased the circulation in Rome during Augustus's whole reign. However, luxuries were already on a very great scale, and there was much eagerness not only for the curiosities produced in the empire, but also for jewels from India, pepper and spices, and all the rarities of Arabia, silks which were not made in the empire, began to be in demand there. Nevertheless, the money drawn from these mines still exceeded the sum sent out of the empire to buy all these things. However, under Tiberius, money became scarce when that emperor collected 2.7 billion sesterces, I can't say it. Anyway, in his treasury. To restore an abundant circulation, he only need to borrow 300 million on mortgages of his estate. After his death, Caligula spent all of Tiberius's treasury in less than 1 year, and it was then that the abundance of money in circulation that was at its highest in Rome, and the wind of luxuries kept on blowing. The historian Pliny estimated that in his time the emperor exported at least 100 million sesterces annually. This was more than was drawn from their mines. See, now this was the problem. See, one of them recognized it. Uh, Caligula spent all of Tiberius's estate. So one of them stashed all the money and the other one spent it, right? And it was that spending of it that the wind of luxury kept on blowing. The historian Pliny estimated that in his time the emperor exported at least 100 million. So that money went out of the nation. When they started getting into luxuries, that money started leaving. Right. One of them recognizes and says, "Hey, we're going to put this all into savings or into lock it all up." The other one's like, "Nah, we're going to dump it into circulation." This was more than was drawn from the mines. So if you're spending more than you're making, you're eventually going to go broke. Under Trajan, land prices fell by 1/3 or more, according to the younger Pliny, and money continued to decrease until the time of the Emperor Septimus Severus. Money was then so scarce in Rome that the emperor collected enormous quantities of wheat, being unable to collect enough tax money for his enterprise. Thus, the Roman Empire declined through the loss of its money before losing any of its estates. That is what luxuries brought about and what it always will bring about in similar circumstances. All right, that was chapter 8. Thank you so much for joining in on today's live stream where we were breaking down Cantillon's theory on Cantillon's economic theory on how money comes into the state and what ends up taking place during that time. My key takeaway from that is the luxurious experience. And I take that from my own personal experience. Like when I bought a new vehicle, had, some credit card debts, had things going on that was beyond my ability to have extra money. Like I was at my limits. The moment that my pay got cut, I essentially lost my ability to continue to maintain my position. And that is like essentially the Cantillon effect in a personal manner, right? Like if you are living paycheck to paycheck and all of a sudden you have an increase in your monthly expenses, whether it was just like, the cost of living went up, or on the other side, you lose some money. Now the problem starts to take place. And what caused it? The move into luxury. I wanted a nicer house. I wanted a nicer car. I wanted a nicer life. And that move into luxury is really what sets you up in order to take the fall that most people end up getting hit with, or being in a position in which they have no idea what to do, and they're hoping and begging and pleading with the government to do something about the situation that they now face. All right. Brilliant stuff, Simon. Well, thank you so much. These 3 chapters, I think, are probably some of the most important things that you could ever possibly read. Like, if you didn't take in any information about the economy, about banking, about anything, if you can internalize the 3 chapters of Cantillon's essay, and again, I left a link down in the description to the Cantillon essay where you can go and buy it off of Amazon. That looks something like that. You don't have to buy it off of Amazon. You can get it for free at the Mises Institute. So just, type into the Google search, Cantillon essay on economic theory, and, you should be able to find it right away at the Mises Institute. Go and download it for free. Read it at your leisure. All right. So as long as our provinces give us more than we export by buying foreign luxuries, we can keep living the high life. Provinces give us more than we export. Let me cruise down here a little bit. All right. Why don't the Catholic Church start a health insurance for Catholics? Each church could offer health insurance to its congregations. Costco health insurance. Now we're repeating. 3% or 9 to 10% is the huge difference. Buy paper stabilizes the lumber industry. U.S. citizens pay 9 to 10% a month in health care. Yeah, it's expensive. Let's cruise down here a little ways. It's not peanuts, it's just what Americans are used to, and the rest of the world pay around the same. Alrighty, guys. That was a lot of fun. I enjoy those 3 chapters. I really do. And I love reading them over and over again because the more I read them, the more I remember something from them, the more I get, another piece of it, another piece I internalize and remember and think about. And again, the more I do this, the more I break it down, the better. Like, it really just comes into the subconscious, right? It becomes like, it just almost becomes second nature for you to just be going down a path of making the appropriate decisions, not based on the fear of missing out, but based on the idea of understanding what it is that's taken place. I don't know how many times I've talked to people who, I've said, like, are you buying into stocks? Are you buying into cryptos? Are you buying into silver or anything like that? And they're like, oh, no way. But then they'll tell me how much they won at playing poker, right? And I'm thinking, well, how much did you win beyond how much you have put in? Like, how much money did you put in to get that $500? Did you put in, $1,500 to get there? Do you even remember how much you've gambled away? Like, I know exactly how much I put into my investments. I know how much I've lost. I know every time I lost, I've taken it as a lesson, and I think, okay, well, hopefully next time I will be smarter about what I've done, and I take it as the lesson well learned. And now that I have done it for quite a while, I feel like, man, I am positioning myself in assets in a way that I think that I'm actually going to have something later on in my life. That's incredible to think. Never had that before. Very few people that I talk to do I have discussions like that with. Like, that's not part of they're like, they're talking about what kind of beer they like, and who won the game, and stuff like that. And I'm like, or even worse, it's Biden's fault, or something like that, or Trump is ruining it all, and I think about all these things, and I'm like, man, isn't there better things to think about? Like, I mean, it's not that those things are bad to think about. I'm just thinking, man, there's other things that I would rather be trying to figure out like, how is it that I get the money to flow to me? Like, that's it. Not why it's not flowing to me. Like, there's plenty of reasons why it's not flowing to me. I just want to think about more reasons why it should flow to me, because there's plenty of reasons why it should, right? So, like, it's up to you. There's an abundance of things to think about why it doesn't work for you, but then again, there's also an abundance of reasons why it does. Right? And you can find the meaning in both of those. All right. How long are we going to stick it out for, guys? It's like 2 hours into this thing. I think a 2 hour live stream is pretty good. We got 126 thumbs up, which is always awesome. I love it when you guys are hitting that thumbs up button. Reading older books, taking what's already the repurposing into innovation, teaching. All right. I do my best to not go to the hospital. They always trying to give me a subscription to a prescription. Hey, right on. Thank you so much, Justin, for the $5. Man, I got to scoot closer to the camera here. All right. It says, whoops. What is the modern equivalent of the foreign mines supporting the U.S. empire? Predatory loans against foreign countries. Let's see here. What is the equivalent? What is the modern equivalent of foreign mines supporting the U.S. empire? I don't think it's foreign mines. I think it's foreign actual energy, labor, resources, effort, everything that, I guess that's labor, but they're not the ones who are coming up with the mine. We did with the central banking money press, with the U.S. Treasury debt. That's the money printer, right? That's the mine. That in Cantillon's essay, it's not the foreigners who are doing it. It's us who are ever increasingly spitting out money out of this, forever mining operation. But it won't last forever. Like, at some point, it all comes to an end. I think the idea of like Cantillon talking about the last form of borrowing money from foreigners into the country, but I don't know if that's necessarily like the case as much as like we owe a lot of this money to ourselves. Like we carry a lot of the U.S. Treasury debt within our own nation, within our own banking system, people's retirement plans, insurance companies, everybody holds the U.S. Treasury debt. And it's also widely held outside of the United States as well. And so when we think about like what Cantillon was describing, I think that's not necessarily considering like a central banking system buying the debt of its own countries, the government's debt. I don't think that's what he was describing. He was describing actually borrowing gold and silver from other nations out there coming into the nation, and that's a different story than what's taking place now. Debasement of curve solvent. Enjoy fishing though. All right. All right. Elderly are afraid of innovation because it's changing the way. Privatization of healthcare has made a big business. Simon, 50 memberships were gifted earlier by Killer Kyle. Holy moly, really? Oh, thank you so much, man. I appreciate that. Now I definitely have to do the member-only live stream. Tomorrow morning, we're going to break down John Williams' recent speech. What is it called? Navigating unpredictable territory, unpredictable terrain. So if you really like the breakdown of Cantillon's essay that I did for these 3 chapters, chapters 6, 7, and 8, increase, decrease of money into the state, come back tomorrow as a member we will break down John Williams' recent speech. This was given November 21st, 2025, so it's brand new. Navigating unpredictable terrain. And we're going to break this speech down word for word. It's a little bit of a longer speech, and John Williams has a tendency to be kind of complicated, but he is also very, very, very prominent within the Federal Reserve, the New York Fed president, and he was the one who gave that speech, Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World, which basically gave away the Fed's strategy before COVID of wanting elevated inflation expectations. So we're going to get a lot out of the speech, I think. I kind of perused it a little bit, and I think it's good information in there. And so if you want to come back and join in on the members only live stream and get a good understanding of this speech where we break it down word for word, just go down into the description, find the link, join us tomorrow. Those who have gotten the 50 free memberships, hopefully there are people who are on this live stream tonight who are getting those 50 free memberships. Consider going back and watching all those member-only live streams. We have broken down so many speeches, coming up with the credible threat theory. It's information that you're not going to get anywhere else. Nobody has done it like we have here. And consider the value that you're getting it for $1. Like, this is free for you, the 50 people who are getting the free membership. And thank you again. Who was that killer? What was it? Killer Mike? Killer Kyle? Killer Kyle. Yeah. So thank you, Killer Kyle. And, consider Killer Kyle has put $50 membership up there, or 50 memberships up there for people to then go and take full advantage of. Consider that something that you can pay forward. This is what I was really hoping, like, for the channel, is that we can start like gifting this to other people, and if they can get encouraged into watching these past videos that we have done, these member only live streams where we are coming up with the credible threat theory, we can start giving and gifting this credible threat theory to other people to then internalize, to understand how it is that the Federal Reserve is operating. Like the idea of them trying to get the neutral interest rate or the Fed funds rate to neutral, or have the neutral interest rate rise to the Fed funds rate. That's something that we discuss here on this channel that is very unique. Nobody else talks about it in that fashion. And we have been literally using that theory and strategizing around that for years. Like, we don't deviate. Many people in the, in the world, economics world, this subculture of people, they have a tendency to bounce around all over the place on where it is that where they stand, especially when it comes to like inflation and inflationary scenarios. But here on this channel, we have been very consistent when it comes to the Federal Reserve's monetary policy and the idea of the neutral interest rate. The neutral interest rate was too close to the lower bound, and elevated inflation and inflation expectations, whether it was from COVID or credible threats of tariffs or war or whatever it is that's coming into the future, has risen that neutral interest rate. And the more it rises, the closer it gets to the Fed funds rate, which makes the economy far less restricted. Now the economy seems to be booming in ways for some people, but yet very difficult for others. It's part of the K-shaped economy that we have learned comes essentially from the Cantillon effect. Again, we here on this channel, we break this stuff down unlike anybody else does. And for a working class individual, I don't know what else it is that's out there that you could use that's going to be more appropriate for you than this information. It's coming from the working class individual. It was built by the working class community. Like, where else can you get it? You can't. This is it. This is the only place. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.